Welcome back to Switzer on Australia's Business Channel. With small business being under siege from a rampaging, rate-rising Reserve Bank, a dollar on steroids, threatened by a carbon tax, and in the wake of the most recent budget, we have Greg Evans, the Director of Economics and Industry Policy at the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who will give his insights on how business is coping with it all. Greg, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
It is a challenging time. I guess business always finds a challenge, but at the moment there are a lot of headwinds there, aren't there?
Well, and I think it's a difficult story to tell because so much of the news is dominated by the mining boom and the boom in engineering construction.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a part of the economy, small business, for the most part, is not necessarily enjoying the dividends that are flowing to mining and those other areas.
So let's just go through some of the issues. But just before I do tackle some of the issues I mentioned in the intro, I listened to Dick Smith talking about how he's worried about immigration getting too high. What's the Business Chamber's view on immigration? Do you think we need more?
Well, sure. I mean, we don't have a target, the population target by 2020 or 2030. However, with all this talk about a massive investment boom in the mining sector that the Reserve Bank and the Treasury talk about, we're going to need skilled labour, skilled workforce in order to build a lot of that. And if we want to control inflation, then we think we should probably skew our migration program towards skilled migrants as the best option at this stage.
Yeah, and it seems to me a country like ours, where hamburger flippers in the Pilbara are getting $140,000 and ridiculous wages like this, it seems absolutely crazy when the whole world seems to be wanting to come here, as we're seeing from asylum seekers. There must be a whole bunch of people who want to come and work here, and we need them. I guess it's just managing the process is probably the big challenge for a government, but to ignore the fact that we've got the resources to take these people seems crazy.
Sure. And look, I think, in fairness, government policy is directed towards that. I mean, they've got a number of programs in order to fast-tracking workers for the resources sector, and that's working in Western Australia. So
that was in the budget, wasn't it?
That's correct. Yeah. So we think that's the right direction, and we shouldn't let up on that area.
Because the big issues are always, like, for example, the western suburbs of Sydney, they've got infrastructure problems there and that sort of stuff. It's been poor planning in the past, really, Greg, hasn't it?
Oh, well, absolutely. But now we've got a particularly mobile workforce, and there's people that live in Western Sydney, there's people that live in Townsville that are prepared to do fly-in, fly-out to resource projects.
Yeah, okay. Let's just go through some of the real headwinds we're seeing now. Let's start off with the carbon tax, because it seems to me this is like just another problem that's been calculated by the government. Well, for maybe good philosophical and maybe even scientific reasons, but still, it's just another challenge for small business.
Well, absolutely, and we've got no issue with the need to reduce emissions. However, our view is, contrary to a lot of the other business organisations, we don't believe we should do that unilaterally. And I think it's pretty easy for your small business viewers to understand this. That why should we move in terms of imposing a major cost on us, where other countries haven't? The major economies in the Asia-Pacific region are not going to impose a carbon price. It just puts us on the competitive back foot straight away.
So when you talk to the relevant ministers, and clearly you do, and I know you're not going to tell me exactly what they say, but what is their defence when you say, why do we have to lead the world with this?
Well, I mean, they have an argument, and indeed Professor Garner has an argument that other countries are in fact leading us, but it doesn't stand up to analysis. When you look at the US, try selling a carbon tax from the Midwest to the US at the moment. It's not going to work. Nor in Canada, they've rejected it. Japan, China. I mean, they're doing other things in terms of promoting renewables and the like, but they're not in.
Well, they're doing that as well. And a lot of big companies like Qantas and Foster's have done a lot of things to reduce their carbon footprint. But to impose a carbon price, which really is a tax, is a big imposition.
Well, I mean, that's our point. I mean, companies are motivated enough to do this on their own right. I mean, that seems to me the true market. People are prepared to introduce energy efficiencies, reduce their emissions, because that's what consumers want, and it's a good point of market differentiation. And that seems a real market outcome rather than imposing a tax or a regulation such as a carbon price.
Well, and one of the things I've found quite surprising is that until last week, there was no mention of compensation for small business, but I think I heard someone mention it. What's your take, Greg?
Well, as far as we know, that's not to everyday small businesses, turnover under $5 million. That seems to be pitched further up the line.
Oh.
And and in particular sectors such as plastics and chemicals and food processing.
So trade-sensitive type
Yes.
sectors. Okay.
But our view is that if you're a small business and you're manufacturing something, then you are actually trade exposed. You're either import competing or you're maybe exporting your goods. So you're trade exposed. And our problem has been that many small businesses are either in that situation or they have less market power, and therefore they can't pass on the price increase associated with carbon price, and therefore they'll lose market share. It could well have an employment impact as well.
And an interesting thing is that if you're using local inputs, which then will be carbon taxed and they become expensive, you may well start buying the imported ones. So it's going to hurt the local business as well.
Yes, well, that's the point. Carbon leakage, it actually doesn't serve its original purpose. The other thing about carbon pricing, people don't necessarily realise this, is that it's not just about your electricity bill, which is going to go up, 25%, but all your inputs will go up as well. And many businesses that have spoken to us, they say that it's the indirect inputs that may well even be as great as the direct electricity charge and the gas charges that will go up.
Let's move now to the budget. And I've got used to going to a budget and not being overwhelmed by what government's offering small business. What was your take on this year's budget?
Oh, well, pretty similar, Pete. I mean, I can't remember the last time I was actually overwhelmed by a budget. And in fact, it soon got swamped went back to the perennial issue of the carbon tax. And, there were some good measures in the budget, and one we spoke about at the outset, promoting greater opportunities for skills and training and the rest of it. They were all good announcements. But in terms of small business, wasn't necessarily a lot in it. There's some stuff on depreciation, which will happen in 2012. That's a year off. But, as far as really good announcements in terms of promoting investment and entrepreneurship for small business there, sort of small business missed out this time around.
Do you think this government tends to maybe take a small sector of small business and be relatively nice to them and then think they tick the box for the whole sector, but they therefore lose a large part of the sector with a lot of stress, where they've got payroll tax and they've got lots of employees, they've got the new wage system to cope with, they're probably carrying a lot of debt because they're expanding and growing because of interest rate challenges. Do you think the government actually misses that group?
Well, yeah, I think that's right. There's a lot of, ministers sometimes misunderstand the aspirations of small business. I mean, basically what small business wants, they don't want hotlines and all this sort of thing. What they want is they want the government to manage the economy well from a macro point of view, so interest rates low. They want low taxes, and they don't want red tape holding up their business. And, in terms of taxation, not a lot's happened recently. And in terms of red tape, that requires politicians to actually understand the dynamic of a small business. Small business just doesn't want to get immersed in complying with endless red tape.
This is probably a hard question, but you're the person who should answer it. If you were actually advising the current small business minister, Nick Sherry, what do you think would be the most important initiatives you'd like him to think about?
Well, it's difficult for a small business minister because they get the residual. They've got to deal with all the other potential bad policy that gets turfed up. But I think I'd make the mainstay of is business is particularly sensitive to taxation, and let's do something about personal income tax. Which most small businesses aren't necessarily incorporated. Capital gains tax they're obviously very sensitive to, and payroll tax. I mean, these are the big picture issues, and unfortunately, it's been put up to this tax forum in October. But we would like to see these fundamental issues being debated now, not the carbon tax, because I don't think it's a mainstay economic issue.
But the interesting thing about the carbon tax is that Professor Garno actually indicated that there will be some big changes to personal tax rates, where if you're under 80,000, you might see the threshold go from 6,000, tax rates from 6,000 to 35,000, isn't it? And then above 80,000, tax rates are going to increase.
Well, I mean, I don't know how plausible this all is. It seems to come from the policy development school, making it up on the run. Because, if you want to provide a tax cut, then you've got to do it from a tax base which is sustainable. But this carbon tax, as I understand it, we're going to be reducing carbon. So in the long term, how can you fund a structural shift in taxation with an eroding tax base, that is, from less carbon?
And $6 billion is a fair whack of money to be doling out to, I guess, in a sense. What I'm seeing is that the government has a lot of pressure from the carbon tax. So the compensation they dole out is going to either save their butt or cook their butt.
Well, we think, you should keep taxation policy separate. If you want to have a carbon tax, let's have that debate, but let's not try and sweeten it with personal income tax cuts that may never happen and probably aren't necessarily well targeted. Otherwise, it's starting to look like wealth distribution.
Yeah, okay. Let's move to the other area, interest rates and the Reserve Bank. Have you ever had a chance to have a discussion with Glenn Stevens about how small business is reacting to interest rate rises?
Oh, certainly. And our board meets with the governor once a year for talk about these issues, and he does get the message in those meetings about the difficulties faced by small business. Of course, the problem we now have is that if we do have emerging inflation concerns, and that looks like the way it's headed, monetary policy is a pretty blunt instrument, and so it's going to hit small business over the head and all sections of the economy. So it's a very difficult judgment. But our view is that at the moment, let's defer a rate increase until towards the end of the year. We think one now would be quite damaging for the prospects of small business.
Well, I know on the weekend I read in the Fin Review, Michael Byrne, the CEO of Linfox, he actually said that he thinks that the east coast of Australia is deep in recession.
Well, yeah. I mean, manufacturing, over the last 12 months, it's contracted by 3%. So manufacturing is actually in recession. It's dealing, of course, with the high dollar and the like. But to hit it over the head now with an interest rate increase would be quite devastating, as would indeed hitting it over the head with a carbon tax in 12 months.
Banks and lending to small business. Have you guys developed a policy from what you're seeing? Are banks holding out, or are banks now actually trying to shovel the money out? Because we know that they're pretty flush with liquidity.
Look, we all said all along, often it's all about competition. And unfortunately, banks are making a bigger effort now, but I'm not sure the demand's there.
That's right. That's ironic, isn't it?
Yes. And a lot of small businesses are learning to work without their bank and reluctant to even go and talk to them. They saw how they were dealt with during the global financial crisis. Suddenly you bank with someone for 30 years, but you hear public pronouncements from the banks that how risky small business is. I mean, I think that got a lot of customers offside.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that the banks admittedly are borrowing at much higher rates overseas than they have in the past. And it's probably only business that can afford to pay an interest rate that can give them a margin. So given the fact that the economy is so strong, according to the Reserve Bank and Treasury, banks should be really willing to take a punt on small business.
Yes, well, I think it comes down, a lot of the banks lost their skills in how to lend to small and medium-sized enterprises, because that's hard work. It's not like lending to a corporate where you've got published accounts and all the rest of it. And it's not like signing up a housing loan where you just check that someone's got a job and check the security of their property. Understanding a small business cash flow, as you know, is quite difficult. I don't think a lot of those skill sets were lost from the bank.
It's probably an area the government should be looking at to really help both small business and the banks as well.
Yes, that's, I think, demand at the moment. It's quite lukewarm in terms of bank finance.
Bordering on the very cold.
That's
all right,
correct.
thanks for joining the program.